Preview. 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 Preview.
Hi everyone, it's Callie from Team Venom Media. For my number 3 pick of the top 5 episodes of Team Venom Media this year, I'm going to pick the podcast that I was a part of with Rory. We interviewed Eric and Julia Lewald as part of the X-Men podcast. We spoke to them about the original animated series, and I fangirled just a little bit, as I have a tendency to do. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Team Venom's X-Men podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bailey, joined by my co-host, Callista Valentine, and we've got 2 incredibly special guests. I'll be honest, as a fan of all things X-Men, these are 2 of the most influential people on my fandom, and it's Eric and Julia Lewald, who were responsible for the 90s X-Men animated series and have recently brought out the art and making of the animated series here, and you're also going to be involved in the revival that they've just announced for Disney Plus as well. So it's awesome. So firstly, thank you for joining us, because it's huge. So,
our pleasure, Rory.
Yeah.
But yeah. So obviously, the first thing I wanted to ask you, I've obviously changed the initially planned questions that I had for you because of the announcement on Friday. First, I was going to ask you about the love that the fans have had for your series and how there's been several other X-Men series, and it's yours that everyone has as their go-to for definitive on-screen X-Men. And since then, obviously, it's been revitalized. So Disney have obviously got the same view as a lot of the fans. When you were working on it back in '92, did you imagine that it was still going to be something that's regularly talked about and that would be getting a revival in 2021?
Absolutely not at first.
And the world was different then. You had VHS tapes, you maybe could record something, but
there was no internet.
There was no streaming, there was no fire hose of entertainment option back in '92. So the idea that this could be readily available, that you could watch something on a cell phone, that was magic. We didn't even know what that meant yet. Yeah. So we hoped it was well received. We had our fingers crossed. We were hearing that it was well received. But that we would still be talking about it is amazing.
I mean, we did realize once it got on the air in '93 and people liked it, and it became a very, very successful with audiences like worldwide, as far as we were told. But when we were making it in '92, the first season in '92, they had such little faith in it that they just wrote us all a 1-year contract, and all of us creative people were let go after the first 13 were written and drawn, and we went off to start working out their stuff because we just had a baby and we had bills to pay, and we thought, okay, that was nice. We wrote 13 and we did our best, and I hope it does well, and maybe there'll be a second season if we're lucky. And that shows how Hollywood they'd never really seen a successful Marvel cartoon before, so, and there hadn't been any movies, so they didn't really. There was except for the immediate executives above us who believed in it completely. Margaret Lesh, who made the show happen. This
president of Fox Kids.
Wonderful lady who worked 10 years to get it on the air, and no one would listen. And she said, "This is going to be a good show, believe me." And I said, no, it's just a silly little comic book. Get over it, lady. She and Sidney Iwanter, her right-hand man, who was the hands-on, who was basically our creative boss, those 2 people believed. And it came back, and it was this hit. And then at the time, the great thing for us was we ended up with 4 more years of work with a young couple with 2 babies was a big gift, and that was the first thing that came to our heads. But thinking that we'd be talking about it 25 years later or 30 years later we thought it was crazy.
And if I can just jump in and clarify who we are in relation to what we're talking about. Julia Lewald, one of the writers on the series, and in the first 13, I was the writer of Days of Future Past Part 1, and then later I got to kind of be a fly on the wall for the whole 5-series run. The story for Beauty and the Beast, got to write Whatever It Takes. Eric here is the showrunner, story editor guy. He developed it for television. His name's on every episode. Every script went through your brain and your computer. And every story.
A little bit anyway. Yeah.
And so in the last, let's say 5-6 years, it occurred to us, that there might be a fan base out there for the show, but it wasn't easily available. Rights issues. You couldn't just casually watch it on a streaming service.
Yeah, Marvel and Fox and a couple of people had split rights to it because Marvel got out of business during the show, got into bankruptcy. So nobody was interested in say 6 years ago when we first brought up the idea we could do a book. No one at Marvel thought we couldn't get it. We couldn't get someone to return our phone call. So we just did the first book on by ourselves, and by the time it came out, they'd resolved all the previously on X-Men.
Eric's what do we call oral history. This is Eric's oral history of the show.
It's almost all interviews and personal history because we didn't have the rights to most of the images. So we did that one. By the time it came out, the people at Marvel had gotten all the rights together, realized that this had been a special thing that the entire world had enjoyed, and thought, well, heck, they should make some money off it too. So they contacted us.
Then Eric gets an email from the global head of licensing for Marvel, and we thought the hammer was coming down. We
thought they were going to get mad at us for doing the first book without their permission. And they said, no, we want, now that the rights are together, we want to do a bigger art book with all the images in it.
As they call it, a coffee table book.
Yeah. And so that was.
And they asked if we would do it.
They asked if we would do it. And so that got that together. But really, when we, 5 years ago, we knew there were fans. I mean, we talked to people from Brazil. We had a job at Singapore 2 years ago, and the Malaysian.
Oh, I was wearing one of my previously on X-Men shirts.
The Malaysian TSA, the agents there checking our luggage.
Oh, that was a good show.
Wait a minute, X-Men, and they all got together, the 6 or 8 of them, and said, "Oh, it's our favorite show."
When they realized,
Storm, she's so strong. So
knew that show. We worked on that show. Oh my God!
So if people 10,000 miles away grew up on it as well, we realized, oh, this was something different from the other shows we worked on. This touched everybody all over the globe, and people said, "Oh, I learned English watching it." Whatever.
I watched it with family members who are no longer with me, and I'm watching it with my kids now. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. And so at the time, it was just our job. And
it was a great job, but it was a job.
We've worked on 40 some different TV shows, and this is another one. This was obviously the most successful one, but while you're just getting the work done very fast on a very tight schedule, you're not thinking about its future. And it has grown into this much larger thing that really is gratifying, because we're fans too. Yeah. I mean, we have shows that we saw when we were children or teenagers that resonate with us and stay with us however many decades later and have meant a great deal to us. So the fact that one of our shows could do that for somebody else is just special.
Fair enough. Callie, over to you.
Throw me in the hot seat every time, Rory. Thank you.
Welcome.
Oh, we can keep talking. We have no problem.
It's fine. We have guests on these podcasts. I spend the first 10-15 minutes kind of quietly fangirling to myself. And then Rory always throws me in and I'm like, what? Sorry, hello. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the show, because it hit me in a period of my life where I was going through a hell of a lot. I won't go into detail, but I was going through a hell of a lot. And then when I kind of started seeing the show and I started seeing the storylines you did with like certain characters, they really kind of resonated with me, like the younger me. And it helped me come to terms with a lot of things about myself. So thank you for that very much.
We are humbled.
Thank you. Thank you. I suppose my question about the show really would be, did you get to work quite closely with the cast?
I'm laughing because no.
Oh.
In fact, we didn't speak or meet to the cast directly until Eric called them in Canada to interview them for the book.
Wow.
What happened was,
Yeah, it was a very quick schedule, and it was, we would come up with the ideas for the stories, get them approved, and write them as fast as we humanly could, and the artists would draw them quickly, and they would record them. Not here
in the US, in Los Angeles,
but
we're in Los
in
Angeles.
Toronto, Canada, 3,000 miles away. It's
Yeah.
as if you had a show and they were recording it in Istanbul.
Okay.
And so it was a fairly common thing in Hollywood at the time, because the Canadians had a slightly better fee structure for the producers. So the producer could say, oh, after 5 years, I'll come out 20% ahead if I use a Canadian cast on the cost of the cast. Wonderful cast up there. There's a big theatrical community up there. So it's not like it was less, but we couldn't be there for the recording sessions. This just shows the technology. They would record, we would get sent through mail, stale mail, an audio cassette of their recording, and we get it on, say, on a Wednesday, and we give our notes quickly. And when they did the next recording on Friday for the next episode, they would redo, if we had issues, they would redo some lines or add something or some before they started on the fresh episode, and that just continued through the. So we never there was a voice director up there that we were in contact with, that Dan Hennessy, who's very talented, but we never spoke directly to the cast until 20 years after the show was done. And that's which is very odd, because we heard every single thing that they recorded, and they saw every single thing that we wrote. So we were communicating with them for 4.5 years nonstop. We just never spoke to them in person on the phone.
How crazy is that?
That's a bit strange. I mean, especially with like today's age, like we're doing a Zoom meeting right now for this interview. But 20, 30 years ago, that was just not a possibility. So I can imagine that must have been a little bit frustrating, if like the constant back and forth and the waiting around more than anything, just going, right, well, we can't move forward until we get this.
Well, let me jump in here and then hand it to Eric, because X-Men, the animated series, was trying to do something a little different from what was regularly on what we call the Kids Saturday morning block on ABC, NBC, CBS here in the US, now on Fox Kids. There was a kind of rhythm, there was a kind of style to most voice acting on Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
And when
we first set up the first script up, the Night of the Sentinels, we got the audio cassette back, and it was just awful. It was very, very much like a little kiddie Scooby-Doo version of the X-Men. So, we'd gone to all this trouble to get the executives to listen to us and make sure that we had this very adult, dramatic show to do, which fit with the comic books.
Yeah.
And then they just didn't quite, we told them that in a letter, say, please make, but they had 10 years of experience doing cartoons for us, and they had a certain style and tone down. So I think that actually worked in our favor, because we sent our producer and director and an executive up there. They sat there for 2 weeks, along with a couple folks from Marvel.
Larry Houston and Sydney Iwanner flew from LA to Canada
for 2 weeks
to do this.
A couple folks from Marvel, and they sat down there with them and said, we have to recast this. Find your most dramatic actors. Go to your local Shakespeare festival. Find the most intense, gravitas-filled adult voices you can find, and bring them back. And we're going to do 2 more weeks of casting session. And that's why I believe we got this very serious, dramatic group of people being our characters, because it was our desperate overreaction to how horribly wrong the first set of cast was. And they got it, and I think they recorded the first episode 4 or 5 times.
Yes, which is unusual.
The actors were just pulling their hair out, but say, well, I guess we're getting paid for each time we do it, so it's not a bad thing. But I said, okay, we finally got the tone. So that was very much, we got our intentions across to the cast at the beginning, and once the cast and the voice director got it, it was smooth sailing.
Yeah.
We really gave very few notes over the 76 episodes. They really understood, once that first one was the way we liked it, what it was we were looking for.
And realized X-Men, the comic books, had been around for 30 years. But there had, and you can go back and find little bitty clips of X-Men kinds of stories on some of
Other
very
Marvel
early
shows.
Saturday morning kind of thing. But what those voices were needed to be defined and presented for the series. And
Yeah.
Bob Harris, who was the fella at Marvel in New York, who went up there
Yeah.
to Canada for this recasting with Larry and Sydney.
Yeah, he had a marvelous reaction to it. He was head of there were 4 X-Men comic books going at that time in 1992. This poor man was putting in 80 hours a week supervising all 4 of them. And he then would have to look at our scripts to make sure that we were, staying within the Marvel universe properly. And he said he went up there, that he had the most surreal experience when the casting sessions were going, because he'd heard all these characters for 25 years in his head since he was a child, since he started reading the books.
But in his head, with his,
and had imagined what Wolverine sounded, imagined what Xavier sounded. And then to see a real human being walk in and embody that and bring his own voice to it, he said it was the most surreal experience of his entire life, and he loved it. He just his hair went up on the back of his neck watching this come to life.
The moment when Cal Dodd was Sidney Aller's, he sounds feral.
Yeah, the direction that Sidney gave to Cal said, "Who's this Wolverine guy?" Said, "Well, he's feral."
And then just
And
he riffed, and Cal Dodd growled into the microphone.
And
everyone's head snapped on a pivot.
Yeah, all 8 people in the sound booth kind of looked and pointed and said, "Do that again."
But again, here we are 30 years later, and you've got these billion-dollar film franchises out there. When I see the artwork of an X-Men, it's the animated series voices that I hear in my head.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Same here.
Yes.
The same here. I was just going to say that it doesn't matter how I see the characters now. Whenever I see X-Men, I mean, I've got some on my shelf here. I'll show them off in a minute. Whenever I look at them, if I think of what they sound like, it's the animated series voices that come to mind. I look at Wolverine, I hear Cal Dodd. I look at my Rogue figure, and I just hear that voice come out just instantly.
Lenore Zan. Yeah,
exactly. And that was my favorite. She was my favorite character in the show. So I hear that voice when I look at anything to do with X-Men. I hear what you guys captured in the show. So thank you. Rory, anything to add?
Yeah, I did this following talking to Cal Dodd last year. I actually got into voice acting myself, which was purely from talking to Cal, and that was also talking to Cal because of the X-Men animated series. So I wouldn't have even had that conversation. I've recently landed my first fairly big part, so that's also down to yourselves indirectly, because if not for you guys with Cal, I wouldn't have been speaking to Cal, and so on and so forth. So thank you for that.
I think they call that, Rory.
Pardon?
I think they call that 6 degrees of separation.
I know, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you. But also, like you said about the voice and such, Julie, when you were answering the first question, you mentioned one of my favorite episodes, which is one that you wrote, and that was what embodied Beast for me throughout the comics run. So like the comic character in recent years, they've been trying to make him a bit too edgy with his moralizations and such. But for me, Beast is the 90s version, and the Beauty and the Beast episode that you mentioned is just a fantastic episode, and one of my ones where I'll happily watch that because of the levels of depth that they've got. That's the episode with Beast and the blind girl and the Friends of Humanity and all that sort of stuff, and it's just a fantastic episode. So
by Stephanie Matheson. I came up with an idea, got to pitch it, and just want to clarify.
She sold the idea, but one of her dearest friends on the planet, Stephanie Matheson, did the actual script for us.
And it still kills me. It still breaks my heart. It still just gives me chills.
Well, there's so many episodes like it, and I mean, the Nightcrawler episode is one of my favorites as well, and the story arc you had where Wolverine was struggling with his rage issues, so we went out to the Antarctic and such like that. I think there was a lot of stuff that you guys were touching on that when you look at certain TV shows that were around at the time, like not just animated series, but TV shows in general, they wouldn't touch on these sorts of topics because there's such a wide range of things that you guys went with. How much freedom did you have to actually do that? Was there much resistance from Marvel, or were they happy for you to just sort of go all out?
We were gifted with amazing freedom.
Once in a lifetime.
Yeah, and we keep telling people that there's some wonderfully talented people in Hollywood, but a lot of times, you're writing for your boss in effect because they're paying you and they have certain things they're doing with the show, and 9 out of 10 times when we take on a show, there'll be some difference of opinion or they'll say no, make it simpler or make it younger or whatever. And we say, we just think that's wrong. And they say, no, I'm sorry. This is what we've agreed to provide. In this case, or they'd be very scared of the rules, very strict rules around children's programming in America. I know there are strict rules in Britain where certain movies can't be shown because of violence, that sort of thing. But whatever rules there are for American movies, they're tighter on television and they're much tighter on children's television. So we might even get a good boss who wants us to try to be a little more adult with some of these themes. And there might be, say, a censor, the standards and practices.
Broadcast standards and practices.
Every show has that. And he or she might look at it and say, oh, you can't talk about religion. Oh, you can't do this. This is way too adult for this age group. No, done. Gone. Don't even talk to me about it.
And that person has absolute control.
Yeah.
Absolute control over what gets on the air.
So we had a very thoughtful, understanding censor, Avery Coburn, who actually liked the comics, was a fan of the comics, is very and she'd come from primetime censoring. So she
standards
had
and practices.
she had a much more adult understanding idea of what stories could be.
And she knew what the X-Men were and supported that.
So that was a perfect choice to be the person that set our final limits. And in things like the Nightcrawler episode, she was very careful. There was 2 or 3 weeks of back and forth with her. You can't show this, you can't show that. There aren't going to be any crosses in this movie. She didn't want us to burn down and then you negotiate. You said, oh, we really need the monastery to burn because of this and this. Is okay. Well,
you can have the library, but not the sanctuary.
Yeah. So she was careful. I mean, if you'll notice, Wolverine never stabs anybody.
It's usually cuts a tie or cuts through a gun, and
it just was not permitted. It's like taking a gun and shooting somebody. We couldn't do that. There are certain things we just absolutely couldn't show. But within reason, she was the one we asked about killing Morph at the beginning, sacrificing Morph to set the heroic tone of the show. And again, that was about a 10-day negotiation. And she finally said, yes, I understand why you're doing it. It's not gratuitous.
It won't be on camera.
Please have it off camera.
Here are some rules.
Yeah, here's some rules for sacrificing one of the X-Men in the first story. And without that, our show wouldn't have been our show. And on top of that, our main boss, Margaret and Sydney, kept on just telling us to push it. She said, look, this is an opportunity. This has never been done in children's programming. You think you're pushing it far enough, push it further. In fact, on the Nightcrawler episode, our first pass at like a little story outline for that, there was more action and less, agonizing over faith in it. They were kind of equally balanced. And there were, there's snowmobile chases in the mountains and things. And our executive came back and said, no, this is a real personal story. Get rid of the usual spectacle and focus on Wolverine and Nightcrawler and really push that. And so we didn't even have to ask to do that. We got that as direction from our creative executive.
And also the craziest thing, and here we are decades later, at that time, Marvel was in a chaotic place financially. Marvel did not have final say over X-Men the Animated Series.
In fact, they didn't care. They didn't care for. I
Wow.
saw it on note. They didn't care for the way we set up the Nightcrawler episode. The guys wrote back and said, "We hate this. This kind of they're off on vacation. They happen to stumble upon an adventure." And I just wrote back and said, "I'm sorry, guys at Marvel. We like it." And
Wow.
Fox had final cut. Marvel did not.
How crazy is that?
Marvel had to put up with, if they disagreed with us, they just had to, sorry.
Can you imagine today?
No.
I mean, the thing about especially with what you were saying with the Nightcrawler thing, I think it's really complimentary to yourselves that the comics sort of reflected that as well. So if you read any of the Wolverine stuff, the solo Wolverine stuff from the past 20 years, his go-to best friend's Nightcrawler. And prior to the 90s, that wasn't really the case. He was a loner for the most part, with the occasional sort of sidekick type character like Jubilee, which was mainly, again, a reflective of the animated series. But it became one of those relationships that sort of defined Wolverine in the comics. Was his best friend's Nightcrawler. That's all you need to know. Nightcrawler. They had story arcs in the comics of him going through his priestly duties and such, and it's all stuff that Marvel didn't even hint at until you guys came along with your animated series and basically went, wouldn't it be great if Nightcrawler did this? and I think that's just amazing to see. So.
One that I'm still can't quite wrap my head around it is what became the Age of Apocalypse series in the books.
Yeah.
Because Eric, you'd come up with the idea for One Man's Worth, which is a two-parter that posits what if Xavier did not live long enough to be there for create the X-Men and how the world would be this hellscape. And you, in pitching that to Marvel, because you would pitch your stories to Marvel, so they go, yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, so they liked that, and then they, 6 months later, expanded it. Let me let the
No worries. Sorry about that, but yeah.
No,
so
fine.
in doing that grew into what became the Age of Apocalypse books for Marvel. And timing wise, it came out first. So most folks assume One Man's Worth is an iteration of the Age of Apocalypse stories, but it's actually the other way around.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was gratifying because we took so much from the books, like say from Chris Claremont's stories. There's so many relationships, so many bits of stories that it was very nice to see that they were able to use something that we'd come up with for the show to do some very nice comics.
Fair enough. Well, over to you, Callie.
I had a question, now it's completely gone. No, that was it. I remember what I was going to say. When we were talking about the Nightcrawler episode, you mentioned they go on holiday and they stumble upon this adventure. Oddly enough, those were one of kind of my favorite things, especially looking back on the show through my adult vision, was the little moments like that where an episode would start with them just living their lives, like they were out shopping or they were off on holiday or they were at the mansion relaxing. I liked those little moments because it showed that, these guys are mutants, they're superheroes, they go out and they fight the bad guys, but if they want to sit down and drink a can of Coke and eat a pack of Doritos while watching Jerry Springer, they will. And I like it made them more real than most other TV, especially kids shows did at that time. It made the characters and the world they lived in a lot more believable. So, I mean, was that intentional or was it just what you did for let's do this?
I think it was intentional. We always, and we got, again, support from this, both from Marvel when we talked to them, but certainly from our Fox people. We just said, we're going into this thinking of these as a bunch of 25 to 30-year-old adults, real adults with real problems. And the least exciting part of the books for us looking back was just one super mutant against another super mutant fighting like, it was a wrestling match. Yeah. Love wrestling.
Yes.
But that part that attracts people is like gunfights in Westerns. You're going to see that, but that isn't what the story is about. The story is about the individual people, and the more we could let their hair down, see them with, see Wolverine with old girlfriends, see family dramas happen on the side, and then have an X-Men sized problem blow up around it. Though that we really were conscious of thinking of them as adult human characters first, and superheroes and mutants second. And I think it helped us because we're trying to show them try to integrate with humanity, which not all mutants want to do, but they were.
And the humans, and not all humans want them to either.
Yeah, and so that was the great strain there, trying to see if humanity can accept these mutants and find a way for everybody to live together, and focusing on the fact that when they're not on the job, they're regular folks like anybody else, seemed to be a reinforcement of that for us.
And I've sort of got to add to that, because there was something that I really loved in the series that came about because of that sort of portrayal of the X-Men, and also was reflective in the comic books, was the treatment of the Morlocks. Because you had your good-looking X-Men, your ones who could potentially lead in everyday lives, and everything, all on the main team, and with the exclusion of Beast. And then you'd have the Morlocks story arc, where I'm sure there's a line in the show where they literally say, where the X-Men are trying to convince them to come out of the sewers at the end of it, and like, well, we're not good looking like you guys, and all this sort of thing.
No,
and you showed the other side of the mutants, where they have to hide and all of that because of the society thing. I loved that you sort of, whether it was, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but you had all those moments like what we were just talking about, where they're on vacation or they're doing things like that, and then you went, and this is what it would be like if they didn't look like that, and I thought that was great. But, so I'm sorry, I didn't have a question there. I just want to comment on that, because it was something that I did appreciate about the show, and things like that, and they've since done that in the comics. Although question wise, one of the things, because you brought up the death of Morph, one of the things that I thought was really well handled by the show was the return of Morph, where they essentially, I know there's still a taboo about mental health and that sort of thing these days, but back in the 90s when I was growing up, you hardly ever saw anyone talk about it. And then you had Morph essentially going through a complete identity crisis when he came back, and you had all the insecurities that he developed because his team had left him and that sort of thing, and they left him for dead, and he was actually survived, and all the rejection thing on him. That was a really powerful arc that you guys did, and
it definitely for me as well touched upon PTSD when he goes back into fight, and then he kind of back like, I can't do it. I agree with you there, Rory. Definitely.
Yeah. So what made you want to sort of tackle those sorts of issues?
Well, I don't mean funny you should ask, but I look back on those stories with real pride that here we are in the year, whatever it is, 2021, that you were able to address issues that I don't think ever got addressed before, in what, again, we call Saturday morning kids show. But the fact that you were able to make lemonade out of a lot of lemons, to me is a compelling story, because Morph was supposed to stay dead. He was
Really
absolutely supposed, because it was a heroic sacrifice.
Yeah.
And his death hit every X-Men, and you saw it. You saw what the cost of being an X-Men was, because they lost one of their own. And again, we were all released after the first 13 episodes. And then you get a call back saying, oh, can you come back? Because we're going to do another 13.
Which is very exciting.
Yeah, that's great news. And then you get a second call.
And
that second call.
Yeah, you guys, if you've read the book, you probably know this problem. After about 8 weeks of the show being on the air and doing so very well, and Fox being very excited, they had a #1 hit. But they did a quick
What's called a focus group.
They get 39-year-olds together in a room, and they ask them questions. They show an episode, and they say, well, who's your favorite character in all of X-Men? And by a landslide, Morph won. And Morph was
Oh, wow.
only in 2 episodes and was killed, or an episode and a half, killed off, and on purpose. And okay, so the executive called very shamefacedly and just said, "Look, I know how much that death meant to you. You don't want these to be pretend deaths. You want this to be a real sacrifice. You want to be consequences. However."
But
All of our business people called me with the results of this focus group and said, "Is there any way we can please bring Morph back?" And that was a rough hour. I did not, none of us wanted to undercut what we thought was one of the most important things we did in the first season. And finally, we caught our breath and said, "Okay, look, we're professionals. We'll make it work." And grudgingly hung up and said, "Okay, now what do we do?" So, but
was it you and Mark Edens?
yeah, Mark Edens, who hit my dear friend from college, who
was like the head writer of the show.
laid out the first 2 seasons with me.
And his name's on a ton.
Yeah, and Julia were in our dining room. It's okay. Now, what do we do? And it just hit us that, okay, we now have an opportunity. Here's a person that everybody loved from the X-Men, and they all showed their love for him when they grieved when he died. He's coming back. It's a shock. Some of them might feel grief about not going back, or guilt about not going back for him. And how does he feel? And that is, so we tied it in, and okay, who could have done this to him? We asked Larry Houston, okay, who's the best villain to tie this in that might have pre-planned, might have saved Morph or pulled Morph away from the, and so, okay, it's Sinister because he's always plotting these things, to trick people.
In the X-Men comic book universe.
So we said, okay, fine. So now he's going to be turned against his friends because he's so bitter at what's just the near-death experience he's had, and he maybe feels that they were partially responsible. He can't get over that. And he's got this guy brainwashing him, saying, "Yeah, they left you for dead, Morph, work with me and you can get your revenge." And that's a very human thing to place him. And so it was kind of a gift to the giving up what we wanted in the first place about having him be dead. It was kind of a gift to us because, okay, now we have somebody that's plotting against them that they love and who knows them intimately and knows how. It's like when he turns into Jean Grey in front of Wolverine, he knows how to push everybody's buttons. He knows how to torture these people,
and does it very effectively.
And we actually spent screen time with him, showing him planning this, and so it made for a great villainous turn by an old friend that we had not at all planned.
At all.
So you're forced to, circumstances force you to come up with something better than you would have done on your own.
Yeah, it was a brilliant story arc. So all the better for it.
And we got to come back with season 2, the opening with the heralded wedding of Scott and Jean.
Oh, yes.
Which was, there was pushback from Marvel at the time about doing that in the animated series because it hadn't been happening in the books yet.
But as long as it was this fake thing, they said, "Oh, fine,
okay,
fine."
okay.
Yeah,
as long as Morph is handling officiating.
Yeah, good. So we were allowed to have our wedding anyway and have it be false, but yet have all the emotions of a wedding thrown in. So that was nice.
Oh.
Well, with regards to that one, I think that was I shouldn't know this, but that was issue 15 of the X-Men series that they did, where they actually finally did that. But issue 1 of the X-Men series, which was very much the same sort of look as the animated series, same sort of same uniforms, it was the Jim Lee era. That's the biggest selling comic book of all time, which is amazing. And that was within the same time period of your show coming out. I know it's viewed as its biggest selling, not just when it came out, but with all the reprints that were coming out years later. How much do you think the X-Men animated series influenced those sales?
When Margaret Loesch Margaret Loesch was working for Marvel Productions and was beating the drum to try and get an X-Men series on the air with any of the other networks, and no one was biting. It's harder. 1990, 1989, 1990, 1991. It's hard to realize, but your average person on the street didn't know who the X-Men were. It's hard to believe that because the comic book itself was so huge, but it was huge in the world of the comic book.
In the subculture of comics, and
which is big, but it's not, dare I say it, TV big, or blockbuster movie big.
Yeah, because Margaret would tell the head of CBS Kids Network, please take the show on. It's the biggest comic out there. They sell 1 million issues a month. That a couple million people read it because it gets passed on. And she said, that's fine,
1 million.
But we need 4 million for it to be a successful show. And these may be some nerds in their mom's basement reading these comics, but we need
the attic.
But we need a broader audience. And 85% of America, even with all these comic sales, 85% of America and the world don't know who the X-Men are.
Hard to remember, but that was the case.
Stop trying to make me buy this comic book, Margaret, next. So,
and plus there were 8, 9 people on the team that had to be introduced to an audience that no one knew about versus like one major superhero. It was a lot of people trying to introduce.
So we are a bit of a tightrope walk there, the first 4 or 5 episodes, trying to set up this world and making sure you understood who everybody was and what the relationships were. And because we couldn't assume that the kids or the adults, whoever is watching on Saturday morning, which ended up being more like 10, 12 million households here in the US, that they knew who the heck these people were. We had to assume that this is all brand new to the audience.
Well, you did a brilliant job of introducing it. I remember, especially liked how you started it off with the team being established in their own TV universe, with it being the point of view of Jubilee as your gateway entry character with the Sentinels hunting mutants, and you guys did a really good job of just going, right, this is your status quo, and we'll get to all the other bits about who Wolverine is and who Cyclops is later on, and you did a really good job of all of that too, with the Weapon X stuff and the Cyclops episodes where he did the flashbacks to when he was in the orphanage and when he actually went back and visited. I thought that the show did a really good job of balancing that out and not hammering overblowing origins for people early on. But yeah, no, I absolutely loved it, and I can't thank you enough for the huge influence it's been on my fandom over the years. And yeah, I also somewhere I have got a copy of that issue 1, as well as the X-Men Adventures graphic novels that they did based on your show. But one of the main things that I've got to ask you about is, I know there's probably a lot of NDAs and stuff. Is there anything at all you can tell us about X-Men 97?
Yes.
I mean, a lot of kind of general bits.
The very fact that we're having this conversation, mind-blowing. 25 years later, what?
Yeah.
This is happening? It's happening?
Because we've been going to cons for about 5 years since we got the first book going.
That gave us an entree to go to conventions and meet fans.
A couple a month, and every single time, every con we go to, fans ask, is there going to be a continuation? Is it going to be another season?
Is it coming back? Can you do something about that?
And we kept on saying, I'm sorry, we haven't heard a thing, and Marvel is not asking us about it, and probably if it happens, it'll be a whole new set of people.
Because that's how it works in Hollywood.
Yeah,
that's how it works.
25, 30 years later, I mean, when we did the show, we were in our 30s, and there are people like Stan Lee in his 60s at the time that were around that still obviously knew the characters, but in the end, it had to be our show. So we just kept telling people, if they do a new show, it'd be nice if they talk to us, but it's going to be whoever is going to be running the show creatively. It's going to be their show. And again, we haven't heard anything. So we hadn't, and then we did hear something, but got to keep quiet. Yeah. We're going to announce this.
Well, okay.
Yeah. And when we announce this, the whole world will know. But for now, yes, we did sign an NDA. You can't talk about but there's going to be another show. And yes, since before this Disney Plus was on the air, they've been thinking that this is top of their list of things to do, but now they're ready, and now they have a team in place. And so when we were introduced to the people that have started up this show, it was a Zoom call with a crew of 60,
Wow.
led by Bo DeMaio, it was his pitch, it's his show. He's taking it to and it is a continuation. It's the same characters.
And
if you see the designs online, they're 95% the same as our designs. They're just a little modernized, a little polished.
So respectful. Let me say that. So respectful and heartfelt and genuine in their approach to this next step.
Yeah,
in the
and
process.
it seems like every single member of the crew had a room full of X-Men merchandise and books and posters behind them.
Because these are the people who grew up with the show, which is like, oh my God.
Yeah, they were 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds when the show came out. And so they're the ones doing the new show. So it's as if the fans are getting to do the extension of the series. And with luck, it'll run for 4 or 5 seasons, and they'll take the X-Men to places that we couldn't even imagine. But it's starting out with references to references to what was in our series. It's starting out with references to that and then moving on.
So, as long as it starts with the words previously on X-Men, then
oh my God.
It starts like that, I'm hooked.
Can we shout into the ether that previously on X-Men, we figured out that was Norm Spencer, who was the voice of Cyclops, who just ran those few words
previously
on X-Men. It's like, oh, please let them, I'm saying it now out loud, please let them reuse that in the new X-Men 97, just as a salute to Norm Spencer, who passed away a year and a half ago and is no longer with us. It's like, just to hear that voice would be a delightful iteration.
Nice tip of the hat.
Yeah, the nice tip of the hat. There you go. Yeah. So yeah, X-Men 97. Can't believe we're talking.
Oh, and it's good. It's going to look so beautiful because
we ours couldn't.
Yeah, because we had so little time and such a modest budget. It just they held together with tape and string. And
the artists worked so hard. The original artwork
so hard and so fast.
Good. But it was a tight budget, and
all of those cells had to be hand painted, and there were 700,000-800,000 cells per episode. It had to be hand painted, and everything just that there wasn't really time. If there were problems, work around it. They're planning to spend over 2 years getting the first season premiered. So it looks like, say, mid-year 2023 is what they're focusing on. Summer or fall 2023. So they have this big, wonderful, talented staff.
Oh my God.
They were
very enthusiastic.
Good, bad, or indifferent. It's going to be a beautiful looking show.
Yeah.
And they got 9 9 of the original voice members. 4 of them playing leads, 5 of them playing guests.
Now, this is okay. You asked earlier, and we said we had not even met the voice talent until Eric spoke to them, until Eric was working on the Previously on X-Men book. Well, since that time, we have become friends. We've been able to attend cons together. It's been really nice. So right after the big announcement on Friday, the phone rings.
And it's Beast calling us.
It's George Boozer calling us. It's Beast.
He said he just recorded his lines in the first 3 episodes, and he was ecstatic.
Oh my God, Beast! In the same room, in the same recording studio
in Toronto.
In Toronto. I mean, come on, that's some full circle stuff right there. That gives me chills.
Yeah.
So, and he was very excited. So
I can imagine. Oh wow.
Yeah. So that was real nice.
I'm thoroughly looking forward to it. There was a loose continuation that Fox put out a few years ago called Wolverine and the X-Men. Did you ever catch that? And sort of
Aware of it. We did
Yeah.
not work on that. That was,
Nah,
again,
but
every iteration after us was a separate group of people
Like-
doing their take on things. And that's how it should be
yeah,
for those kinds of things.
they sort of started it with almost similar events to the end of your show, and then it sort of went from there. But it was a more stylized version of the X-Men. It just didn't feel right, but it was good. But it sort of
was
seemed like they were
excellent.
trying to relaunch it, but and capture that magic, but
Well, you should
couldn't
mention,
quite do it.
Rory, I've got it here on DVD.
Yeah, yeah,
There you go.
yeah, sure, yeah.
And that one,
So at least that's something.
that was a heartbreaker. We understand the big cliffhanger remains hung. It did
Yes,
not-
Yeah, I think they lost financing or something midway through, so it was cut,
yeah, which is
abbreviated.
that's rough on fans.
Yeah, and I know the Evolution series and we knew a number of people. It's a small community of writers and artists out here, so we knew a number of people that worked on that, and they took a different point of view on that. They planned to make it younger. They planned to make it more like teen X-Men, and
That's fine. That's
that can work.
Yeah.
And there were some of the book series that were more that way. So it's certainly within canon. It wasn't the kind of stories we were pushing to tell. They seemed to be gentler, more teenage stories than the ones we were. And so much as we were hoping it would be successful for the sake of our friends that were working on it, again, it had its run. It was a little different. It was not a tone. I think the newest one that's coming out, they're specifically saying since it's on Disney Plus and it's not a kiddie show, they are free to make it even more adult. They won't have the restrictions that our show had.
Yeah.
So it can be at least as adult and dramatic, and that's what Bo's intentions are.
So keep your fingers crossed, folks.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I do think the one thing that your version of the X-Men show did, it definitely highlighted and showed off a lot of prejudice. There was a lot of storylines that ran with that. Obviously, big part of the X-Men, kind of, it's almost a metaphor for racism and things like that. And, and I hope that the new show kind of tackles modern kind of subjects the same way that you did back in the 90s. I hope that there's that kind of correlation between, it happens in the show because it happens in real life.
That we muse on this occasionally. It's like 30 years later and the world is still full of rage and ugliness.
Yes,
It's
definitely.
So I think as long as that's the way the world is, I think the X-Men themselves will always be a tragically great metaphor for
being
that
other.
for being other,
Yeah.
for being other, being persecuted, and yet doing your darndest to, like, Professor X. Let's try and figure out how to work with the folks who hate and fear us. And every now and then you go, Magneto may be right. I'm done. I am done. So
Yeah, I have moments like that where I go, you know what? Get me my cape.
Where's that asteroid M? Let me find asteroid M.
Yeah, it makes sense. Things evolve. In 2021, there are similar but new issues. When Stanley and Jack Kirby created the original book in 1963, here were a couple guys that had lived through the Holocaust.
Oh,
I mean, they lived here. They lived here, but they had seen this. They had grown up in the 20s and 30s and watched the world go crazy. And so they had a real tangible connection to this idea of persecution and some people being considered the other. And
but it was more of a teenage focus.
Again, very much a subtext and something they wouldn't have pushed as hard as we pushed, because they were more interested in selling comic books, but it was a resonance underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
In the comics, Magneto is a child of parents lost in the concentration camps.
Jesus.
It's just kind of an aside. It's just a little bit of history. It's not dwelled upon. but they grabbed that for the movie, and it was something that showed what they were reacting to in 1963 when they thought of other. It was in the middle of the biggest center of the civil rights movements here, and written by 40-something men that had witnessed the Holocaust. So that was their issues in the 90s. When we started writing in 92, it was the height of the AIDS anxiety.
And then the
Rodney King riots in
and
Los Angeles.
Oh my God.
I remember we had to tone down one of the scripts because, the broadcast standards lady said, "You don't understand. You just had the city in flames."
In an episode.
In
that was
an
gonna have a
episode,
city-
and 2 days ago, the southern half of Los Angeles was in flames. We are not going to get, this is not going to be well accepted. So current events affect, and I'm sure the current events are going to affect the writing in the new series. What's going on in 2020, 2021 that the X-Men can react to.
Yeah.
And that it'll be part of the lifeblood of the series.
Wow. I know we've got you on an X-Men podcast and to chat about X-Men and stuff, but you guys worked on so many different programs over the years that I'd sort of be remiss to not mention some of them. I mean, just in the background, you can see Hercules, Chippendale, and a few others. I know you also worked on Transformers, Robots in Disguise at one point, as well as Gargoyles and RoboCop and Street Fighter and things like that. And
I didn't know that. Okay.
Your resume is huge.
Another favourite show of mine.
What's with X-Men? I know obviously X-Men's like the biggest thing because it's possibly one of the biggest Saturday morning kids shows of all time. But what other works are you particularly proud of?
Well, just in terms of the thing that gave me the career I have and my break was getting my foot in the door at what was the Disney TV afternoon animation after Disney. I'm saying it all wrong. Chippendale's Rescue Rangers was my first professional job,
and she did more of them than anybody. She wrote 14 of them.
Wow.
And met the most talented artists, the most talented writers who are still lifelong friends during that period. I am so
late 1980s
to early 90s. So Chippendale is the one that's closest to my heart. I got to work on Goof Troop and Tailspin and Darkwing Duck and all those. But just in terms of that got me started. Live action wise, we got to work with an incredibly young Ryan Gosling on Young Hercules, part of the Xena and Hercules family. And even though he was a string bean, he was a 17-year-old string bean versus being like a hulked up guy, you could tell he's got it. Whatever it is, this young guy has it. And here we are a few years later. Yeah, still got it.
That was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
50 episodes. This poor kid was in all of them.
In New Zealand, they were filming.
Once we got started, it was 2 half-hour scripts a week. Boom, 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 and they'd film 3 days and 3 days and collapse for a day and 3 days and 3. And we discovered just the differences. I mean, to us, live action was easier.
Don't tell anyone that.
The scripts are about half as long because the directors want to basically choreograph everything. And so they want really limited description and mostly dialogue. Whereas with storyboard artists, they like you to they don't say, and then they have a big fight on the bridge.
You can't do it. No, you have to like,
they want to say,
who's
okay,
fighting whom
yeah,
and what
this
angle
person,
and where.
Yeah, this person jumps on this person flies into the shot, this person. And so in all that detailing, our Young Hercules scripts were maybe 21 pages, our X-Men scripts were 40. So that's it was a wonderful experience. It was very nice people at Universal. It was a nice change of pace. We were a little frustrated because that censor didn't understand that this was supposed to be part and parcel with Hercules and Xena, which were very adult, which is almost like R-rated movies.
Yeah.
And so since this was a Saturday morning show, it was, what these teenagers could do was more limited than what we would have liked. We had much stricter notes on it, on that than we did on X-Men.
And then I'm going to say, Eric, with an Emmy nomination for your work on
Oh,
Madeline up
Yeah,
there.
yeah. We Madeline was a sweet project. It was we did a series of 11 TV movies when I was at Deke Entertainment for Nickelodeon, and the My Fair Madeline was one of them, and it was a really successful. I mean, it's a sweet little show. But going from X-Men, my favorite other show working on at Disney was Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh.
Just because the characters were so beautifully distinct and drawn, and so writing for it was just a dream. And those were some of the shows at Disney we were able to sit on the recordings. That was
happening in Los Angeles.
That was special.
Yeah.
They all local actors and brilliant actors.
Massive talent.
And you write something, you imagine it in your head, and sometimes it comes out solid, sometimes it comes out much worse or different. And so, but I remember a couple of those recording sessions with Winnie the Pooh where you gasp at what they did with the little thing you gave them, you know, with a line or with a look or a gesture, and it's
and I'm pointing backwards here. Eric got to help
set up
shepherd the Tick to animation glory, if I can say that. Yeah. So that
I know it wasn't as big a hit internationally as some of the Marvel shows, but it was great fun.
And your name's not on that, but a personal Easter egg is if you watch the pilot episode of the Tick animated series, when poor Arthur is getting fired by his own browbeaten boss, the browbeaten boss's name is our brother-in-law's name. So that's our Easter egg. Yes, Mr. Peter Spawn. Yeah.
Oh, I love the Tick. Even now, when I'm playing a video game, if I'm charging into battle, quite often over my headset, I will just randomly shout, "Spoon!"
Callie, I'm with you.
Everybody gets the reference, and guaranteed at least one person will go, "I know that one." So, thank you.
Well, over to you, Callie.
I'm just having a drink. Which catch me off guard, dude.
Timing.
Right, I think only question that I can really kind of come up with at the moment. Do you have a favorite episode? Not so much that you worked on, but one that you can watch back now and just be like, yeah, that's the one. That's my favorite.
Just rewatched the two-parter One Man's Worth to sort of get up to speed to do some thinking about that. And dear God, that one is like a Swiss watch. You got time travel, you got parallel universes, you got different timelines, and all that's going on. And then you've got, to me, which was the heart and soul of it, was the fact that out of all this action, it's that Storm and Wolverine in this horrible hellscape have found each other and fallen in love, and not only fallen in love, and are married.
And then they've got to lose each other as well.
Yeah,
and they understand the stakes and they get it. And it's like, oh my! And if that had happened in an earlier season, because it's season 4, I don't think it would have had the resonance, because we as an audience wouldn't have had those 4 seasons with Storm and Wolverine living their lives in our world
separately, and they were thrown together in this story, and that was by design. If it had been Scott and Jean, well, we've seen that 16 times already.
Yeah, we know. Yeah,
but we've never, and the chemistry that those two actors have.
Allison Seeley Smith and Cal Dodd. It's like,
they're just sitting having a picnic, and they're talking, and they're flirting a it's off the charts.
And it's like, oh my! And as a writer on the show, like, why can't we have that in our timeline? Why? This is breaking my heart. Why can't they be together? They're supposed to be together.
Yeah.
That's the one that just kills me.
Kills me. I mean, looking back, since I had to approve the choice of the stories and B, help polish them to every single one of them to final. There half a dozen I really wish I had another shot at, because they're not working the way I really wish they would have. But there are still many that just still work. We asked yesterday, we were talking to some other folks, what would you change from One Man's Worth? And I looked, I said, I was really looking closely, and I can't think of a thing. In 44 minutes, I can't pick out a scene that wasn't necessary, or some action that wasn't working, or a point of view that was poorly chosen. So yeah, she was right. That one really is special to us. And from a creator's point of view, we were talking about it, there are a great number of folks out here that really write well. I mean, we have faith in them, like Len Yulee, who wrote both the Nightcrawler episodes. Our feeling, because we've known him since Disney.
Yeah, we met there.
And you hand him a story idea, and that 3 weeks later you're going to get just a really immaculate script, and you won't have to spend your weekend redoing it to fix it. So the actual craft of making the stories come alive is something that we see in a lot of our colleagues, and so that's something we have a bit of faith in. The thing that's impossibly difficult in my memory of being the person in charge of the stories is deciding which 13 stories to tell this season.
Yeah.
And some of them, like One Man's Worth, kind of burst full blown into, oh, I see this beginning, middle, and end. I see this is really going to work.
And that was you.
Others, you don't see it. You work and you sweat and you get it to where it works okay, and it's never quite the inspiration. But getting 3 or 4 like that out of each 13, that, oh God, I can see this. This is going to be a good story, no matter, even if 2 or 3 of us drop the ball and we get mediocre animation this episode, this is going to work. I was never completely confident that that we'd pick the 13 best stories. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Because it could be anything. There are thousands of stories and thousands of just little bits and pieces of some old comics that spark something in somebody's mind. So it's narrowing it down to the 76 we narrowed it down to was the hardest part.
And going back, it's such a testament to the show and the comic books that fans sort of look at it and go, oh man, you adapted those comic books so brilliantly. There aren't a lot of direct adaptations. There are very few direct adaptations, but as far as the spirit, I think, of the comic books, and translating that into a different medium, I got to give props to the show for doing that.
Well, with regards to that, one of the things that I thought was also brilliant was there were certain storylines that you adapted and made your own on there that you could put against other versions, like the Phoenix Saga, for example. That was absolutely fantastic in the animated series. Claremont's initial run in the comics was great as well, and we've seen 2 live-action movies fail to adapt that in comparison. We've seen X-Men Evolution and Wolverine and the X-Men. They did it on there, and it's sort of like all of those, because of watching the animated series years back, and I've showed this to my son, so it's not just nostalgia. I watched it recently with him when we went to see Dark Phoenix at the cinema. It was like, there's all these different versions of that story that's come out, and probably the best one is, well, not probably, easily the best one on it, especially in media, in visible media, would be the animated series. And I'm quite looking forward to X-Men 97 exploring the other stories that will be fresh for any viewer, because you guys covered so many iconic runs, and you're not going to be tied into having to retread them like Fox has insisted on with Phoenix and such. So yeah, I'm thoroughly looking forward to seeing where you take X-Men 97.
Now 30 more years of comic books. Oh my God.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's like a fire hose. It's like, what, how do you, it was 30 years when you were doing X-Men, the animated series. It is now 60 years of comic book history for X-Men 97. That's a lot of material.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And the way
Dense.
we stayed sane when we were doing it, there were some people some of the writers that we used that were really crazed fans, and that knew all the books from the previous 30 years and were anxious to squeeze in 150 different story points that they'd loved in the books. And luckily for me and for Mark Edens, who was helping to lay out those first 2 seasons, we hadn't known the books, and so we were just listening to what we thought were the best stories. And I think if we'd had an agenda, we might have fallen victim to the, oh, but that was my favorite book in 68, then when so-and-so did so-and-so, and you got, and I think for the new folks, they have even a bigger, they're all fans. And so I think, but they have to decide what the stories are resonant for them, because those are the ones they're going to be able to tell best. And if they're a little bit different from the ones we did, we expect that. And we don't want to be the grouchy old people saying, no, in my day, this is the way we told an X-Men story. We're hoping that they keep the spirit of what we did and come up with their new obsessions, as long as they keep the characters straight. That we'll be excited to see.
Yeah. And
that's why they hired us on as consultants, so that we could look and see what they've done and tell them what we think is exciting and what we may think is weak, and if they listen to us, great, and if they don't, well, that's on them. But we're very much looking forward to it. We're chomping the bit. We haven't really properly started too much yet, but we so far so good as far as the designs go, and what little we've had to read.
I've noticed with the designs that have been released on the internet so far, it's been the core team and then Psylocke as the additional character that they've released the artwork for. So I'm quite looking forward to seeing how they introduce her. I'll wrap this up now, because I know when we contacted you about doing one of these, we said probably 20, 30 minutes. And I'm conscious that we've doubled that so far. So sorry. It's been absolutely great chatting to you both. I can't thank you enough for your contributions to, my childhood by default with the sheer volume of things that you did. And also obviously the X-Men, and it's a series that I've continued to love to this day. I mean, I've got shelves full of stuff. Callie was with me at a Comic Con at the weekend where I was hunting out rare X-Men graphic novels and things like that, which I wouldn't have that love if not for the 90s animated series. So
same here. So
thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And again, we're not the only ones involved in that magical world, but we've been carrying the banner for a while, so we're happy to do that.
And when cons come back, if we get to do a couple over in Great Britain,
please.
We'll let you know, because
that'd be great.
we told our booker, you need to find us a couple weekends over there so we can visit.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much. That's been awesome.
And in the meantime, if we could say, hey folks, holidays are coming up. Books are available for sale for your holiday friends. We've got links on our website, xmentas.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. I'm way too much on Twitter. Just saying links there to buy. Folks, the paper shortage is not a joke. If you want to get a book, get it now for your friends.
Yeah, we've been warned they may run out.
Yeah. So anyway, again,
and for the benefit of the viewers, I have got one of them here, and it is absolutely fantastic. And I personally, I really appreciated being able to go through and see all the old art boards and the influences, and especially how the opening sequence, which was iconic, how that looked first and things like that. And yeah, it's a great book, so I happily vouch for that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well.
All right. Thank you then.
Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Callie.